I look after people clinically with dementia, and we know that a lot of their family carers get depressed. About 40% of people have clinically significant depression or anxiety, and others have symptoms of it. So building on the evidence and a manual that already exists in the States, we wrote a manual so that it could be used by people with a psychology degree but who are not clinical psychologists. And using this in a randomised controlled trial, we found that we were able to both decrease depression in the people who were depressed and prevent some people developing depression.
My role in the project was that I was helping develop the intervention with Jill, and also supervising and training the therapists who were delivering the intervention. The 8 sessions were delivered and involved a number of different components. So there was a sort of psychoeducational component which looked at dementia and how to manage stress and how to access services. There was a couple of sessions which focused on behavioural management techniques and understanding people's behaviour, especially when it was challenging. We also looked at challenging unhelpful thoughts in carers and promoting their acceptance of the situation, because I think, as Jill said, we don't necessarily have all the answers, and we're not necessarily able to change all the behaviours, but what we can do is help people to kind of understand and deal with it a bit differently. There was a strong focus on communication skills and planning for the future, and we also were looking at increasing people's pleasurable activities and sort of scheduling in pleasurable events for carers and the people with dementia.
I saw a wide range of people from an enormously varied set of backgrounds, people living on estates, people living in gigantic houses, and one of the things that struck me was the emotional strain and demands of caring for someone with dementia was just as intense regardless of people's financial or educational background. One thing that I think struck me is that every person I saw was helped in some way, though not necessarily the same way as other people, by taking part in the intervention. There was someone I'm thinking of, a lady, she was in her late 40s. Her father, who she was caring for, became incredibly aggressive quite suddenly, and she had the entire burden of care. And with our intervention, the way that we were able to help her was to develop her own self-confidence, such that she was able to ask for the help that she needed, and so that she could spread the care amongst her family members, get support for herself, get support for her father, and also begin to feel better about things and have hope.
I suppose each session had quite a practical focus. It was about sitting with the manual, going through and coming up with particular examples that were fitted to the person and their relative. And each session also had a stress reduction or a relaxation technique at the end that people particularly liked. There was also a lot of kind of practicing and trying things out in between sessions, so that people could then think about how they could kind of keep some of the strategies going over time.
So one thing that we did was teach people to relax. We had some techniques like I think it was called the signal breath, which people could use at any time and any place, and was quick, and it was to help people deal with those situations where the person they cared for was just too much for them and they felt that they were going to explode. It's just like taking a deep breath, but having someone rehearse it with you, having someone ask you to practice it over the week and going over it again and again, week in, week out for 8 weeks, means that people are much more likely to use that technique, even if, you know, as opposed to the sort of situation where someone suggests it to you and then they go away. We also made a DVD of relaxation techniques, of relaxation exercises that people, slightly longer ones, that people could listen to by themselves. We first would take them through them in the session, at the end of the session, to relax people, and then they were left with the CD of relaxations that they could then listen to by themselves. Another thing that we did that a lot of people found helpful was just trying to keep track of the behaviours that their relative had that they had difficulty with. Then they'd come back to the next session, we'd talk them over, and then we'd encourage them to think of ways that they could do things differently, things perhaps that had worked in the past that they'd stopped doing, so that they could manage that behaviour in a way that was more helpful to them.
The thing that I think is important actually is that it's a very flexible intervention, and people would choose particular sessions that they found very helpful, and there might be other bits that didn't really fit for them, and maybe would focus on that less, and I think that has a lot of applicability in a sort of range of contexts. I suppose also the supervision and training reflected that. So what we did was had group supervision where the therapists could learn from each other, and the training was very much focused on helping people to feel skilled enough to deliver the intervention without feeling that they had to be experts and offer solutions and strategies to the carers. It was about them feeling able to support people to come up with their own ways of coping and strategies.
I think what we want to happen next is for our intervention to be implemented. You can see that we feel passionately about how useful it was in terms of economics, which is always the bottom line. It didn't actually cost any more than not doing it because people stopped using some other services, and in sort of nice terms it's a higher than 99% chance of going through the NICE threshold, which is really higher or as high as any other intervention. It worked to prevented people becoming depressed and help people who were already depressed, and we felt that nearly all carers were able to take something from it. We're continuing to follow up the cohort to look and see what happens to them in the future, but even 8 months later people were very much better and at no cost to the NHS. So we think the important thing now is to start implementing it, as dementia is the epidemic of our time, and we've got some answers from this, so it's really important that we start implementing it to help the numerous people who are looking after their family with dementia.